Welcome back to Concrete Play. So in the last video I talked about play depth, but it turns out that I dropped the ball and didn't do a very good job of it, so let's talk about it again. You can forget the last video and we'll discuss it from the top, and the last video won't even be in the playlist. Play depth is a very important part of your game, and I think that a lot of new devs don't really understand this, because what happens is a new dev, an inexperienced dev, will come up with an idea within a genre, and then they'll put a little bit of a twist on it. So they'll have some cool little thing they want to put into a genre game. But the problem is that the genre part of the genre game, that's not what makes the players stay. The genre is a scaffold that allows you to quickly and easily introduce things to the player. So if it's part of the genre, you can just throw it into the game as substance for them to walk on. You don't have to worry too much about them getting too lost or confused, and you know that they're going to at least put up with whatever you can toss at them because it's a standard of the genre. That's not what makes a game interesting, though. What makes a game interesting is this part, the twist. Now, most games that have a good twist, I'm not talking about a plot twist, I'm talking about a gameplay twist. So let's just come up with a theoretical game. One of the comments I received on the last video, which convinced me to make this new video, was someone was trying to develop a kind of Harry Potterlike. And my example is not going to be his game, because I don't know anything about his game, but I'm going to go ahead and walk you through how I would think about creating a Harry Potter-like using the concept of play depth. So if we're going to talk about maybe a simple JRPG style game where you play a group of students at a magic school, then we have all of the genre conventions already in place. We have the genre of the JRPG and we have the genre of the magic school, and those go pretty well together and everyone knows what to expect, so we can provide all of those details. But we come up with this twist, right? And we say magic is learned in classes. So right off the bat we say, rather than buying magic from a magic shop or unlocking it during level ups, you have to actually go to classes to learn your various spells. Okay, that's a good twist, but the thing is, it's easy to stop here. It's easy to say, that is a fun way to change up a standard formula, and therefore that's all I really need to make the game interesting, and the rest of the game I will fill with genre convention stuff, fighting trolls or whatever. But this is actually the most important part of your game design, and this is what has to provide the depth, not the genre stuff. The genre stuff is not going to provide you with any depth. It's just a scaffold. So you need to make this have enough depth to pull a player in and keep them interested for a long time. So how would you do that? Well, in my case, the easiest thing to focus on is the fact that this is something that takes time. When you are going to a school, time is passing at a particular rate. And we can do a kind of atelier sort of setup. If you've never played any of the atelier games, they are games where you play an alchemist and you learn alchemy and stuff, and they're very strictly split into, semesters. They're not terribly awesome games for most people, but they have a very good niche and they're very good at it. So basically we're talking about you're going to school and semesters are passing. And a class takes a semester. So you're not walking up to the dean and saying, I'd like to buy this class, and getting a spell. You're signing up for a certain number of classes, and you're getting the spells that are taught in those in that class. And that is a good way for us to allow people to differentiate their characters. So even if you had 4 or 5 students, you could split them between classes and end up with 4 or 5 different kinds of characters. This also easily splits up. So we've got the idea of a calendar with different semesters, right? But this also easily splits up all of the rest of the complexity that we would like to provide. So for example, levels are simply your age, flat out. As you go past every semester, you gain access to higher powered classes. A senior is going to have more powerful spells than even a very talented freshman, because the senior has been able to attend senior level classes. whereas the freshman has just gotten started with the basic classes. So there's a built-in leveling system, and it's not about killing monsters. It's about just letting time pass. And that means that our reward system can be vastly different from an ordinary game. Rather than trying to gain XP, you might be looking for dropped loot. You might be trying to get yourself extra XP to boost your classes maybe a little bit, stuff like that. But we're starting to get this concept where it is half life sim and half JRPG, and I think that's going to be necessary. Whenever you talk about a school, you end up making a life sim. There's really no way around that in my brain. Maybe you guys can come up with your own methods of doing that. But this is a very easy way to turn the twist into something that has a little bit of meat to it. And you can easily see how this progresses very well. So when the player first comes in, they have like maybe 4 classes that they're forced to take, and then 1 free elective that they can choose between 3 classes. And in that way, they quickly learn how this system gets set up. They learn a couple of basic skills. They're introduced to a couple of other characters. And then in the second semester, you get to manage your classes a little bit more freely, and maybe your other party members, you get to manage their classes too. As you go on, we can introduce more and more complexity. So for example, while a freshman might have exactly 5 class slots at all times, the sophomores might have up to 8. And the idea being that if they are taking more classes, they're learning more skills and spells, but they're going to be weaker because they're not focusing on it as much. So if you take fewer classes, you either get more powerful versions of the spells, or you get a stat boost as well, stuff like that. We can also take this into account when it comes to school activities. Since we are part of a schedule, things are happening inside this schedule. There are, events that happen at various times of the year, and we have to figure out who is going to be available to be on our party when the zombie invasion starts, or when we decide we're going to take a week off and go to the beach, or whatever. We have to allow ourselves some freedom there, and that can make the management steadily more complicated. Now, that's something you would introduce as you go on. You're not immediately trying to balance, 6 characters and their free time and their schedules. No, and we never actually want it to be so heavyweight that it is the game. We just want to steadily introduce little knots and complexities that you have to think about. There's a lot more stuff that we could do with this. One of the things to keep in mind is that your twist should generally affect the primary gameplay loop of your game. Right now we're talking about replacing the leveling system with a yearly system, some kind of scheduling system. But the leveling system is not the primary gameplay of a JRPG. The battle system is the primary gameplay of the JRPG. And so we have to talk about how our twist will affect the battle. Now, the simple fact is that a JRPG really depends pretty heavily on blob combat. The concept of range and position are very, very weak in this sort of game. And it is a little bit difficult to really get a good feel for all of the monsters' positions. There's nothing like range that you have to worry about. The most you get is that some monsters might be back row and some monsters might be front row, whatever. But we can come up with a different battle system. We can take it out of the JRPG genre to a nearby neighbor, and that would be the tactical RPG or the strategy RPG. Whatever you would prefer to call it. The Disgaias and Final Fantasy Tactics of the universe. Now, the reason that this is a better choice is because magic spells are fundamentally very similar to weapons. They have ranges, and they have effects, and they have all sorts of complexities to them, and all of those are basically annulled in a JRPG blob combat system. The JRPG blob combat system is very much a stat-driven system where you're trying to score more points than the enemy. And those points are made into things that are like health and damage and mana, but in the end they're just points. With spells, a lot of the potential of a spellcasting system is in the wide variety of effects. Well, we can get that sort of system if we were to use an actual game board style layout with ranges and arcs of fire and cover and all sorts of other stuff. So if I was going to make this, it would be a strategy RPG with a strong life management component. And because the spells that you use on the battlefield are linked so tightly to the classes that you take and how you take those classes, we have a very fluid flow from the leveling system to the battlefield system and back. So when I say you have to create play depth, I'm talking about going in and finding where your twist can take your game. You shouldn't come up with a simple twist and then say, okay, well, that'll make my game more interesting. You need to come up with a simple twist and then be like, okay, how is the player going to get into this? What do I tell them when they are first entering the game that makes the game interesting? Right up front, I have to make them go, oh, yeah, that's what makes the game interesting. And after that, what do I tell them next to tell them that there's a little bit more depth here that they haven't seen yet? And then what do I tell them next? How does this affect my combat engine? What can I cut out of the standard genre conventions? We don't need any concept of melee combat, so we'll just cut it out. Just chop it off. We don't need any concept of experience points. Just chop it off, throw it away. And that's a very, very valuable skill to learn how to do. It's important that you don't rely too heavily on the genre. The genre is a scaffold. And if you've built something where that scaffold is trying to go, you don't need the scaffold anymore. The scaffold is only there because it has to support you. And if you can support yourself, just don't use it. So that's what I was trying to say with my last episode of Play Depth, but I kind of wobbled and wandered a little bit. If you want a link to it, it's down below, but it's no longer going to be part of the main series of videos. Thank you, and tell me whether or not you understood this, whether you thought it was better or worse than my last video, and so on. Tell me if you've come up with any of these Play Depth ideas. Tell me of a twist you came up with and how you turned it into a design for an entire game. That's it.